Thank you. Thank you for the hearing. Thank you to the panelists, and welcome to the students. So I think, as I listen to you all, I mean, for a worker, I guess whether the wage violation is deliberate or not, it's the same effect. You can't, you're not getting what you earned, right? What is the most common type of wage theft? And someone mentioned Fortune 500 companies. What's the most common wage theft for a Fortune 500 company?
So I think in terms of the most common form of wage theft, I would say in my experience and based on the research that I've reviewed, it's often overtime violations. So workers will get oftentimes the minimum wage for the first 40 hours and then nothing for the overtime hours or some iteration of that. But we do see violations, for example, in the restaurant industry where tipped workers who are supposed to get a base wage from their employer or a guaranteed base wage plus tips where there's a sub-minimum wage for tipped workers. We often see that employers are not tracking precisely how much in tips workers are recovering each week. If you talk to most bartenders and most waitresses and waiters, they'll tell you that they get sort of the same paycheck every week from their employer, which is a very small amount, and then the rest is sort of an informal system that doesn't guarantee them the minimum that they're owed under the law.
Is this detected by the worker? Or, do the workers know that they're not getting overtime? And then what is a worker supposed to do? Other than talking to their boss and then they're told, sorry. Then what is a worker supposed to do?
If I may, Congresswoman, one of the issues is essentially what are the resources available to that worker? Unfortunately, in our experience, what we can say is it's a small percentage of the individuals who aren't paid the overtime they're owed, aren't paid minimum wage, or are paid as, so-called independent contractors when they're really employees. It's only a small percentage who ever find their way to a workers' rights clinic or to a private lawyer to assist them. Unfortunately, the resources available to low-wage workers are very limited. And unfortunately, also, many times employers do not keep the records that the law mandates they keep so that the employees can at some later point figure out what are the wages they are actually owed.
So I've read some of the estimates of the lost wages. I think it was something like 4.4 billion annually from women workers, 3.6 billion from men annually. I guess that's because more women in minimum wage jobs. What is it? 2/3 of the minimum wage jobs are for women. So what can we do to enforce the law? I mean, what can we do better from a federal point of view?
So I think that a lot has been done at the federal level, especially under the last administration. I think Administrator David Weil has conducted a lot of research and study on what works best. How do we leverage limited resources in the best way? And that is where this idea of strategic enforcement really comes from. It's about employing the principles of prioritization to cases and deterrence and thinking about how an agency can influence system-wide change. And those are things that the agency has already started to put in place. We're seeing more and more directed investigations by the agency instead of simply responding to complaints as they come in. And what the agency needs and what I think most agencies need are more resources, more investigators in order to really have a chance to analyze the data that they have and use that data as strategically as possible to find the high violators, to find workers in industries that are too afraid to come forward, and to really use their power to make a difference in employers' decisions.
Can you explain that? How does that happen? If you don't have a complaint, how do we know that there are violations?
Sure.
Madam Congresswoman, the DOL has the authority to investigate workplaces without there being a complaint, and we would urge that the number of investigators be increased, that they be properly budgeted, and that when the DOL investigates and identifies wage violations in the workplace, that, as one of my colleagues mentioned earlier, that the remedy for those individuals is not just what they were previously owed, but remedies to the full extent that the law provides right now, double damages, and as proposed in this bill, increased damages.
Madam Chair, if I just want to ask, so more resources, does anyone have a figure in their mind what kind of increase in the budget or the amount of personnel that would be needed?
I think,
Okay. Yeah.
so I will not put out a specific number out there, but I will reiterate the number that was cited before, where in 1948 we had about 1,000 investigators in the wage and hour division for about 22.6 million workers across the workforce. Today we have fewer than 1,000 investigators for 135 million workers. So I don't think we can say that we're doing as much as we were doing in the 1940s or as much as we can given the prevalence of the issue and the growth in the workforce.
First on the resource, and thank you, Madam Chairman. For the resource issue, I think it's important to recognize that the wage and hour division does a lot of good, and with more resources, they could do more good. Obviously, there are competing demands for the money, and that's up to the appropriators, but it's certainly more resources could be helpful and could benefit especially low-wage workers. From the standpoint of how do you prevent violations, I think it really depends on the type of violation. There are certainly willful violators out there where putting out all the compliance assistance information in the world isn't going to change their behavior. For them, you need punitive, coercive enforcement. But for the vast majority of employers, certainly in my experience, if you give them the information and if you give workers the information about what the law requires, they will want to comply. The workers will be aware of their rights. The employers will want to comply because they don't want a visit from the Department of Labor or a plaintiff's lawyer or anything like that, because it's a lot more expensive in that instance not to comply than to get it right in the first instance. So to prevent those types of violations, having clearer legal standards, having more information put out there, having the Department of Labor and state agencies having more information, more compliance assistance with employers, with community groups, with workers, to make sure that everybody understands the standards, and clarifying some of these gray areas in the law, and there are a lot of them, would benefit workers and prevent a lot of violations.
Thank you very much.